please welcome President Lee C. Bollinger and President of the Republic of Iraq, His Highness Dr. Barham Salih.
Welcome to the World Leaders Forum. I'd like to recognize a few people at the beginning. Of course, the President of Iraq, Barham Salih. In a life that has taken many twists and turns, the President has distinguished himself as a principled and thoughtful leader. He has been an engineer, a dissident, a politician, and a university founder. He has devoted himself to public service, admired for his tireless work ethic and deep love of his country. Skillful, moderate, and non-sectarian, he enjoys the confidence of all the major political factions in Iraq, a rare feat in a deeply divided nation. Born in Iraqi Kurdistan, President Salih became politically active at a young age, running afoul of Saddam Hussein's totalitarian regime at the age of 19. He was arrested twice, detained, and tortured. He went to Great Britain, where he earned a civil engineering degree from the University of Cardiff and a doctorate in engineering from the University of Liverpool. From abroad, he continued his political involvement, working in the United States as the Iraqi Kurds representative in Washington, D.C. Following the invasion of Iraq, he returned home. He joined the interim government as Deputy Prime Minister, eager to help his country transition to a democracy. He developed a reputation as a reformer, as someone who was committed to democracy and prioritized issues like human rights, fair elections, and the empowerment of women. Please join me in welcoming President Salih.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this wonderful introduction, and it's truly an honor for me to be invited to Colombia. But as the President has mentioned, there seems to be progress in Iraq, and perhaps a proof of that, Iraq is no longer in the headlines as much as it used to be. I was telling the United Nations General Assembly yesterday, is important to put things in context when it comes to Iraqi transition. This is a country that has been through 40 years of conflict, unrelenting conflict. 2-3 days ago was the 39th anniversary of the onset of the Iraq-Iran War. Iraq-Iran War, 1991 invasion of Kuwait, sanctions 2003, and waves after waves of terrorism sweeping our land and devastating our country. Not to mention the horrendous calamity that dictatorship has brought upon Iraq, the war of genocide, the use of internationally banned chemical weapons, the mass graves, and violent human rights abuses against the people of Iraq. This is a country that has been traumatized, and really probably no other country has gone through what Iraq has been through for such an extended period of time. So I always ask our friends and observers of Iraqi scenes to put developments in the country in this important context. One cannot be too judgmental about the situation in a country like Iraq. But one thing for sure, after the defeat of ISIS, the territorial defeat of ISIS, the military defeat of ISIS, there is renewed hope for Iraq. There are important developments. Security is becoming more and more assured. The economy is becoming more and more active, and there is a growing sense of confidence among the Iraqi population across the country that the future could be better. There were moments in Iraqi transition where people were in despair. then the outlook seemed to be very, very grim. I can tell you, coming from Baghdad, despite the many challenges that remain, there is a sense that this country is moving in the right direction, and there is a trajectory of hope, a trajectory of positive developments. I was telling an American ambassador who was visiting with me yesterday, who served in Iraq, I was telling him, had this situation been in Baghdad 2 years ago, when you were around, you would have celebrated this as a spectacular success. Yet, people are shy from designating it so, perhaps for a number of reasons, one of which could be the regional dynamics with Iran and other issues. But one thing for sure, Iraq is emerging from decades of war. Iraq is emerging from decades of conflict, and we have some ambitious plans to making sure that our future is different from our past. I want to say the defeat of ISIS was quite significant. Only a few years back, 1/3 of the country was under the control of these terrorists. They were terrorizing the population of Iraq, and they were posing a threat to the international community as a whole. Iraq is largely free from these terrorists. This was a significant achievement and would not have been possible without a real commitment by Iraqis across the political divide. Different Iraqi communities, Arabs, Kurds, Shias, Sunnis, Turkmens, Christians, Muslims, coming together really in the fight against these terrorists. And it would not have been possible without the support of the international coalition led by the United States. And that contribution is highly appreciated as well. But the real sacrifice, the real commitment came from Iraq, and I think Iraqis served the nation well as the international community, by really being in the forefront in this fight. My message to the international community and to our American friends, the territorial defeat of ISIS, the military defeat of ISIS is very significant. We need to cherish it, we need to protect it, but we should not be complacent about it. Military defeat of ISIS is important, but definitely not adequate. And we have seen this movie before. When you defeat an insurgency, when you defeat a terrorist onslaught, only to relax and to be revisited by another manifestation, by another mutant of these extremist groups. I worry that the incubating environment for extremism and terrorism across the Middle East is still there. We need to do a lot more than just territorially and militarily defeating ISIS. First and foremost, the regional dynamics is broken. There remains to be significant presence of terrorist bases and terrorist elements in Syria and many other countries around the Middle East. There remains to be a number of ISIS remnants roaming across the borders of Iraq and Syria that needs to be taken care of. We need a new regional order that really should be based on combating extremism and terrorism, and should not allow terrorism to be used as a tool of policy for one country against another. And if we're not careful, these remnants with these bases or presence across the region could really forge into another mutant that can haunt us and make life difficult, not just for the Iraqi people or the Syrian people, but across the world too as well. But there is more. Terrorism and extremism does not come from a vacuum. It comes from collapsed systems of government. It comes from collapsed systems of education, hopelessness, and lack of job opportunities for the young people. In the case of Iraq, I explained to you 40 years of devastation, 40 years of conflict, and yes, the significance of the moment of taking on ISIS and defeating it militarily is not lost upon us, but we have a 38 million population, almost 70% of whom are below the age of 30. And they are seeking jobs. They are seeking opportunities to contribute to their societies. So we need fundamental economic reforms, restructuring of our economy, empowering the private sector, and making sure that our kids have job opportunities. What is true in this country is also true in Iraq. Our people seek job opportunities, seek services, seek dignity. reforming our political system, reforming our economic dynamics, and making sure our younger population in particular have job opportunities in the future is important. To this end as well, is vital to reforming our education sector. I passionately care about this issue of education. Iraq in the 1950s and 60s used to be in the forefront of education across the Middle East. Safwan was reminding me that people from Jordan, the Gulf, elsewhere in the Middle East would come to the University of Baghdad to be educated. Yet now, our education sector, our health sector are very much behind the rest of the world. And we do need to reform our education system and making sure our universities are able to empower our younger generation to compete in this new world. This is a monumental task. It's a lot easier said than done. The President was gracious to refer to my contribution for founding an American university in Suleymania, and I was saying to the President, many people would disagree about this aspect or that of American foreign policy, but almost there is world recognition that American education is among the best, if not the best, in the world. And Iraqis also aspire to this style of education. And we have launched this American university in my hometown, and they are like you, the kids who go there, the young people who go there. Sorry if I refer to you as kids, I mean my daughter often, I still tell my daughter kid, and she's 30. Am I allowed to say your age, Carla? And they have the same aspirations as you. They want to be contributing to the future of the country, to the families, and to really make a quality life for their own families and for their own children and move on. And this is an area where the Middle East, generally speaking, needs to focus a lot on. And certainly Iraq, with its centrality, matters. But these things, again, are easier said than done. Overcoming the legacy of war, overcoming the legacy of bureaucracy, overcoming the impediment of corruption, which is a major, major issue in these societies that are emerging from conflict, is really monumental. So I urge you to consider the developments and the progress that we're making in our country in the context of these challenges that we deal with. Yesterday in the United Nations, I called for defeating terrorism requires an international coalition to combating corruption and combating terrorist financing. Many people are focused on the military aspect, security aspect of combating extremism, but remember, the political economy of conflict is corruption. This is what sustains terrorism, and this is what allows for the reinvention of terrorist movements across our part of the world. And this cannot be done just by the countries of the region who are locked in this battle day in, day out. This has to be a regional as well as an international responsibility. And I hope the vigor that we have witnessed from the international community in terms of fighting terrorism militarily will also be combined by active measures to making sure that terrorist financing and corruption are combated on a global level, because without it we will continue to be in the same cycle. I'll come to the neighborhood too as well. Mesopotamia is quite an interesting region. Its geopolitics is defining political balances and regional balances. For millennia, Anatolia, Persia, and Arabia have collided in Mesopotamia, and this is what has always been the catalyst for defining the regional order. And we can go on and on depicting and telling stories about how Mesopotamia has been the place. Today, Iraq is at the heart of the region. The consequences of Iraq's developments and transition matters to the rest of our neighborhood, and the rest of our neighborhood is also of consequence to us. We are not an island in the Pacific, therefore we are affected by what is going on around us. I've been going around at the United Nations, meeting with world leaders, reaffirming to them the last thing this neighborhood needs is another war, especially as the last war against terror is yet to be definitively over. This neighborhood, the Middle East, generally speaking, could be the last major region that remains broken in the world. I'd say in the early part of the 20th century, Europe has suffered 2 major world wars. It was fixed. East Asia in the 1960s and 70s, it was largely fixed. Latin America in the 1980s, largely fixed. The world and our peoples have been condemned to this unrelenting cycle of trouble emanating from the Middle East for a whole host of reasons. It's time we really had a look about how to change the dynamics of this neighborhood. I tend to believe that Iraq will have an important role in that mission. Iraq, over the years, has been a domain when every neighbor and most of the international powers have really competed and fought through Iraqis, on Iraqi soil, advancing different agendas. Iraq became a source of trouble, became a source of instability across the neighborhood, but essentially the absence of Iraq from the neighborhood was also quite a profound statement why this region could never be brought back together. The vision that we are proposing, the vision that we are promoting, we say that Iraq, because of its geography, Iraq, because of its makeup, Arabs, Kurds, Christians, Muslims, Turkmens, Yazidis, you name it. It is the place where the fundamental communities of that neighborhood are coming together. And if we were to take a page from other parts of the world, where basically the political rivalries, competitions were replaced by notions of economic integration and interdependency, if it were true elsewhere, there is no reason why this cannot be true in the case of the Middle East too as well. We did not have had world wars in the Middle East. I mean, it's important. The rhetoric in the Middle East is very violent, yes, I agree with you. But in reality, if you look at the context of conflicts in the Middle East, we're not on the scale of what other parts of the world have witnessed. And if we were able to transform and change the narrative from this political arguments and competition and these conflicts to one of economic competition and economic integration, I think the Middle East will be in a much, much better shape. We are now proposing in Iraq the setting up of a major reconstruction fund with 5% of Iraqi revenues being devoted to it, but enabling foreign direct investment to come to Iraq and bypassing some of the bureaucratic impediments that we have had before. Focus on infrastructure, focus on building railways, highways, airports, industrial zones, education cities, hopefully. Basically to really create conditions for Iraqi unity within, but also trans-regional projects. We are working on developing our export capacities, not only through Turkey, but also through Jordan, through other countries in the Middle East, creating that dependency, creating integrated energy supply lines, whether electricity or gas, and so on. Imagine if this were to become true, that Iraq with its geography, a place that has been the domain of conflict and competition of regional actors over the years, to become the bridge, the hub that can combine the economies of these different countries and really change the narrative to one of creating jobs, competing for opportunities, economic progress, and also making sure that this will be the norm of our relations. I know this defies logic, especially at this time when you have so much talk of war, so much talk of tension, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United States, you name it. But I think the very fact that we have this very, very serious escalation in the Middle East today, making a stir into the abyss of yet another devastating conflict that will be really damaging and catastrophic for the entire region and the world as at large, I would say this is the moment to really think of what the alternative could be. The alternative has to be economic integration, has to be a focus on our younger generation, creating jobs, improving our education sector, improving our health sector, improving the quality of life for our citizens, so that the Middle East is not defined by terrorism, so that the Middle East is not defined by immigrants trying to knock on the doors of Europe, fleeing their countries and fleeing the wonderful culture of our nations and leaving the miseries behind them. The Middle East has the resources, natural resources, has the people, the quality of people and talent that can make that difference. We look to the international community and certainly to the United States to be helpful in that vision. Iraq can do it. Iraq is intent on doing it, and hopefully before long I could come back and the president could invite me and I can tell you even better news than what we are hoping for. Thank you very much.